Welcome to Introducing and Developing Boccia for Under 12s. Sorry, yes, I'd like to start with why is Boccia important for children? As I say, personally for myself, Boccia is much more than just a sport. It is a gateway to an improved quality of life. I also try and encourage and use a holistic approach when introducing it, as it does help to offer a sense of belonging and confidence just from that participation within a school setting or within a club. It builds our skills, it builds our athletes their skills and our players, and it also allows them to feel like they belong, because society is otherwise rather cruel. It also offers an activity for children who otherwise would have limited options to engage within meaningful games of sport. I would like to make a highlight the word meaningful. As an adaptive physical educator, I of course see how we dilute existing games, place our children who are in a wheelchair or basically as referees on the side of the game rather than actually partaking. And the beautiful aspect of Boccia is that it allows everybody to take part and play a meaningful game, as we do not dilute the essence of the game, nor do we really we don't actually modify the rules. It also helps develop physical literacy and interpersonal skills, which are of course shared by all sports. As I've mentioned, children, especially children who use wheelchairs, are excluded from partaking in full, meaningful physical education, and so oftentimes do not get the opportunity to develop their physical literacy skills. So Boccia does really do help with that. Of course, it also has therapeutic aspects. Children are able to sustain and, of course, develop physical motor skills. Of course, we're all coaches here. We see how our athletes develop physically. And for me, especially with children, this is just such a huge motivator to do the work that I do. It also offers an ability to continue being physically active whilst they grow up. As just from a purely academic research perspective, from the My Active Future, including Every Child report by the Activity Alliance, it shows that children with impairments, their activity level decreases significantly as they get older. And this is something I myself see as an adaptive physical educator, and Boccia really does sit with them and grow and accompany them as they develop. And for that, I'm just so happy that we have this. So now I would like to talk about where we may find our players under the age of 12. Of course, we have the classic, which is schools, of course, also youth clubs and children's rehabilitation and medical facilities, because a lot of children are also introduced to the sport via their physical, occupational, and/or recreational therapist, the National Paralympic Committee via national projects, and of course also state, regional, or local adaptive sport federations. These, within a development aspect, are required, I find, to really reach everybody, because we may just be working in one or a couple of schools, or we may just have one or a couple of medical facilities that we are in contact with. So using a really holistic approach in this aspect, we can of course widen our reach and so develop and reach as many players as possible. As I also just previously mentioned, of course, we can work with the National Paralympic Committees. And actually, recently, I've been working on a campaign here in Germany which centers around highlighting the sport of Boccia for children and youth. And this is a preview of our 2022 campaign. It encourages teachers, parents, carers, therapists to explore Boccia and introduce it to the children that they work with. This will be disseminated over Facebook, social media, as well as print, and some perhaps even advertising campaigns. And as you can see, you have the image here of one of my athletes, Theo, who is 6 years of age, and the motto or the message in the image is practice from an early stage to become one of the greats later on. And this is Joël and his mom. And it's about not only is boccia a part of school sport, but also a reason to get involved in the local sports club who offers it. If they don't offer it, of course, you can tell them, we have an awesome sport, we'd like to play it with you guys. Now I'm going to talk about further introducing the beautiful game that is boccia, not football in this case. I say the most successful way is to introduce it via physical education class. However, it can of course also be introduced as a part of therapy, which is of course physical, occupational, as well as recreational therapy. You can also introduce it as both youth and youth events and open tryout days, have a little stand, just sort of showcase the boccia balls, perhaps a couple of pictures or videos of people playing it, and then just really stoke the interest from there. And of course, also as an activity within after school settings, such as sport clubs, youth clubs, as well as, of course, community sport clubs as well, where this may be a tryout facility, a tryout option for the participants. Now, I would like to go through a case study of how I introduce it, which I find the most successes, of course, for in the schools. So I, of course, spend a fair bit of time traveling around the country with my set of boccia balls, a ramp paddle, and of course, clippers. And which I find really quite interesting is also worksheets and coloring pages of boccia related activities, especially for the children under the age of 12. How I set up my outreach work is I host a practical session for both pupils as well as fellow physical education teachers, and of course also a session for their class teachers where I educate them on how to introduce boccia outside of the class, outside of the physical education gym, such as through activities such as mathematics, art and design, as well as science. One can be really creative here. And, within mathematics, you have the adding together of scores, just, using boccia balls as counting aids. Then, of course, art and design, cutting out, coloring in with boccia-based imagery. And, of course, as a scientist myself, the distance propelling. However, I think this is, of course, more aimed at older students, such as the scientific topics tend to be more advanced at this stage within boccia. Now, and as I've previously spoken about the taster sessions, I think the best place, and I think just for many children, would be in a familiar environment such as their school. They can be introduced to the sport in one or more sessions. It depends truly upon the teachers and how they wish to support us on reaching out to the children. However, I like to stress to make this session fun. This sometimes is the first and only chance you've got to make an impression with the sport and the child. Some children may leave the session after one try and say, it wasn't for me. And some children will be absolutely amazed at it. So I always try and say, just to make it as fun as possible and just sort of really get them going on that passion and that love that we as a community have for the sport, and try and amaze the children with that. One thing I also like to do is bring along existing experienced players, as they, of course, can also help us within the session. How I like to do it is I like to give them my athletes sort of sections that they want to talk about, how sort of they have fun with it, perhaps even talking about their progression as an athlete, and just sort of really showcase to these kids that, there is, that is a sport for them and that they can play it. Because of course I've experienced this. This tends to be the trend towards children who are a bit more older, that they look at you and they're like, how can I play this sport? Because, I've never had much success with sport before. And really just having that athlete with you or multiple athletes can really give them that, oh, wow, this is amazing. There are these professionals here playing with us and I can be one of them too. And the biggest important thing I like to stress is do not forget to bring a ramp. We, of course, market the sport as accessible, which of course it is. It's the most accessible Paralympic sport out there. However, if we don't have a ramp, then of course we have children who cannot throw, we're excluding them. So just a word of advice from me there. In the introductory session, I tend to give an overview of the sports, its aim, a couple of basic rules. As I said, at this stage, it's about fun. However, some rules which stick and just also make sessions much more orderly is, of course, standing behind a line and, of course, taking turns. However, of course, as I've said, the strong focus is to have fun, to just play around and just to experience the sport for ourselves. Also, I find just allow the children to play, allow them, if they just, it's interesting as well, I find, to just see how many different ways the ball can be prepared. I never, of course, also force them into playing a certain way. And this is just important because, yes, perhaps the way that they're using isn't optimal, but it's optimal for them. And once they are more regular playing the sport, then of course we can turn them onto perhaps techniques and tips of how to improve that. At the end of the session, I usually like to ask for feedback. I like to hear what the children thought of it, allow them to also reflect on the session that they just had. And, before they rush off to their next lesson, just sort of for themselves internally think about what is actually like about the session. And also in that whole aspect, I'm hoping, of course, also for them to have that minute or moment that they may say, yeah, this is something I want to do again. And I'll definitely be keeping my eye out on the session as another opportunity to play, basically. I also think it's important to mention some troubleshooting. There may be difficult times. There will perhaps also be children who dislike boccia. It's fine. Not everybody is made for the sport, and that is okay. I mean, as a kid, you could chase me with football, for example. But again, I picked up the sports that I did, and it's the same with boccia. You will have the children who love it, and that's fine. Sometimes also children need a bit of time to warm up. They will usually be a tad perhaps hesitant, but they'll come along. I also say perhaps not every school wants to introduce another sport. Many teachers are overworked and overstretched as it is, and some also just cannot afford it financially because, of course, we do come along with equipment. In these cases, I usually just offer them advice on repurposing rain gutters into ramps, and using perhaps push balls, etc., for the start out until they receive funding. Or, of course, also providing them with equipment from my club, as, of course, a lot of my athletes have recently had a lot of new balls purchased, so they are able to donate their old ones. And, of course, finally, also, some parents are simply unable to support their child's play. This may be for a variety of reasons. And at the end of the day, I like to work with these parents and with the schools as well, and just sort of come to a middle ground of where, I, as a professional, can also help relieve the burden and just make things possible that we can have the child or the school involved in some way. Now I'm going to talk about taking that step from school to club. When children are well acquainted with boccia, some, of course, no doubt will want to, even before we mention it to them, come up to us and be telling us, oh, I'm thinking about joining a club and, I want to take things further. And just, be in a dedicated settings with other athletes and just work on my skills. As I say, the club environment notes an interesting shift from at school for fun towards a more dedicated, yet still fun approach to the sport. Here, of course, they will also make friends, gain further skill in personal independence, and of course, experience out-of-school sport activities, while of course consolidating their already developing skills within the sport. I also think this is a very interesting part, this transition, as it is a paradigm shift within the long-term athlete development model, where basically they transition out of that school environment into the club setting. I would like to introduce one of my athletes, Joël, and it's a case study as in within his development. I introduced him to Boccia through two taster sessions at his school. From the get-go, he was extremely enthusiastic and was very much intrigued as to the sport that he could play, and immediately he was hooked. Um, we, of course, identified that he needed a ramp, and after lots of exploring and also mutual discussion and trying out, we also identified which type of pointer he uses best. I brought along every type you could imagine, head mounted, mouth, um, basically everything that you could think of. And he didn't really appreciate any one of them, especially the head type of pointer. However, we found out that using the wrist attached pointer was, in fact, the best solution, which he worked well with. As I said, he enjoyed it from the get-go, and as soon as the school established the Boccia club, he signed up for it and was very dedicatedly there. Recently, he transitioned to his local club, where his parents support him, who are training with him to be his ramp operator. And even his parents are extremely grateful and note the change in their son, as well as just their son having something that, he can pursue when he's at home. He watches matches at the European World as well as Paralympic Championships. He is constantly talking about it, so I'm told. And whenever he's in the club, he is dedicatedly working towards his goals. So yeah, he's an extremely competitive lad, and he is happy that he has found an outlet for his energy within his competitive spirit. And just from my experience as an educator, it's just amazing also to see his physical as well as psychosocial development since engaging in the sport. I would also, as I just previously mentioned about his parents becoming a ramp operator, would touch on the topic of working with both parents or guardian. It is extremely vital that we work with the parents and guardian, mostly as, of course, they would be bringing the children to and from practice, of course, whilst also just probably at the dinner table inundating them with their Boccia development. They're, of course, also very happy to help and are extremely engaged, especially when we're talking about assistance, especially within sport assistants as well as ramp operators. And I like to also say that to parents that they will, and they also do notice this, it increases the bond they share with their child. They have a vested mutual interest, and they're constantly on the road developing this, may it be at local competitions, at international competitions, or just at training events multiple times a week. One thing I would also like to say, as this is something that I have seen over my years of play, is that parents are competitive, and this is lovely. However, it's critical to respectfully remind them that their child must enjoy playing. Sports-related drilling, or in fact, slight bullying, is never okay, and it's something that I always intervene in if I see that happening, because that just detracts from the child's enjoyment within our lovely sport. I would quickly also mention the topic of child safeguarding, as of course it's extremely important when you're working with children to be aware of red flags. Player safety begins with emotional as well as psychological well-being. Abuse starts at minor things to, of course, extremely terrible, intense berating, which can be making jestful jokes about their performance, etc. One other thing is, of course, pressure. Children, placing them under pressure may not be perceived as abuse to some. However, it does make the child uncomfortable, and it will make them associate the sport with anxiety. Hence, to never pressurize and, of course, stop if they can communicate so. More serious issues, of course, include physical and sexual abuse. And I like to say that for organizations, especially clubs who have children present, that they are chaperoned at all times by 2 or more adults. And if children raise concerns, of course, listen to them and act following the safeguarding rules set out by the local National Paralympic Committee or Regional Sports Association. I would also go over the psychosocial attributes, which is aggressive language. Children pick up on this just as well as adults do. And frustrating scenario where a child, despite our best, of course, intentions, would not execute the task perfectly, will never respond well to loud, exhaling, downright frustrated language in a positive way. I like to instead search for a solution with them by calmly and encouragingly seeking to assess what went wrong for them, and of course ask for their input and discuss, tailor it towards a collaborative approach. A learning opportunity will yield far better and more permanent results because we're of course asking the child, our athlete, for what they think perhaps didn't work out and how they would remedy this. And one thing I also encourage, because I see this sometimes with the with some of my colleagues, is to always be encouraging. And this doesn't and if the child managed the task or not, I always seek out something that they did well and highlight it. If it was, as I said, achieving the task, or simply because they positioned their wheelchair in a better position, positive encouragement goes a long way for children. And yes, I just believe that this is the best way forward. Now I'm going to quickly, when I say quickly, mention the World Boccia Development Pathway, which of course World Boccia has developed. It covers from, we have here the active start, which is, kindergarten age, through, of course, the beginner fundamental stage, the development learning to play, where they are sort of more independently training. Then we have, the intermediate training to train stage, as well as the advanced and elite sections. However, for this webinar today, the only sections which are of true interest to us are the beginner's fundamentals and, of course, the development stage. As you can, of course, also see with the arrows on this diagram, players may exit the development pathway at any time. And of course, they can re-enter it through the development stage. So without further ado, I will move on to developing the children. However, one big golden rule that I place before everything that I do in Boccia, if it's working with athletes within national team settings or grassroots or development athletes, is to have fun. I enjoy having fun. My athletes enjoy having fun. The environment is positive and encouraging. And I do believe that happiness cultivates success and success cultivates happiness. So, if we're happy, we're more at ease and we do things better. And if we do things better, this makes us happy. So it's a win-win situation, as I call it, the golden cycle of fun in sport. So within the beginner/fundamental stage, all of our children will start at this stage. The aim of it is pretty obvious, it's fun. In this stage, players will observe propelling the ball, and we as coaches and instructors can observe player proprioception of their physical body in the room and, of course, in the wheelchair. We can look at how they perhaps wish to propel the ball, if it is through kicking, using a ramp, or throwing, and what sort of steps they take in doing this. The equipment at this stage is rather basic. As I said, we can use repurposed rain gutters, we can use cush balls, but of course also experienced players, especially when they are either visiting the schools or within clubs, are happy to lend children equipment from their own Boccia archive and perhaps even current kit, so that children may see, what it's like to use a top-end ramp, or what it is like to play with extremely exquisite Boccia balls, and of course also the differences in ball hardness, etc. Basic rule introduction at this stage is permitted, as well as structured play formats. Structured play formats just helps, of course, keep our sessions, I say chaos-free, but there's always going to be a bit of chaos, and that's fine. But just that there is no bedlam, no crazy all throwing at once, etc. type situations. And of course, also within basic rules, I personally go by, of course, standing behind the line, being stationary, um, and of course, waiting turns. I also sometimes, depending upon the engagement level, like to also introduce the structured rules of course, playing which ball is closest to the jack the opposing ball can then play. Of course, a big part of this stage is repetitive movement skills related within boccia play. So I try to encourage my players at this stage to just, find a way that works for them when they play the game, and to repeat this as much as possible. Repeating and just sort of reiteration will, of course, help them develop into stronger players. Once we have sort of established the stage and children are playing regularly, you will see, of course, perhaps some children who want to stay at recreational level, as well as those who want to make the transition through the player pathway. Within the development and learning to play stage, the most poignant, of course, development is the transition to a local club. Pardon me. This signifies an interesting development within themselves, and more, I want to do this. I want to take time out of my after-school activities to continually build on the sport. Within the development stage, there's also a focus on technique development, which is consistently playing the ball. If this may be through the ramp, of course, through kicking, or of course throwing. Basically establishing a basic technical process which gets the athletes from A to B within the game. We are, of course, working on the technical process of the player through the entire development cycle. However, this, of course, is where we make the basic start with it. Also, of course, interestingly, where this becomes more important is, of course, proficiency within basic rules, as well as match dynamics and the scoring system. I like to think of this as an ideal homework task. Some of my students would probably disagree with me. However, I think this is something great that they can take home and read around, learn over. I've developed, worksheets for this, and sort of just then coming back into the play scenario within either the after-school club or within the club itself, where they can then demonstrate, as well as within games be asked how they would score this from their perspective. I also intend to make them fit in refereeing gestures, as well as official World Boccia terminology. This can be, of course, done via homework at the beginning, whilst, of course, also blending this into actual club play, where we ask them for the official terminology, as well as just sort of, without commenting, signalize the refereeing gestures. Of course, I make them aware of this, not that they are thinking that I would be talking. Of course, then we also, in this stage, move on to the different ball hardnesses. I like to make this introduction, especially quizzing them on both the advantages and disadvantages using them, and of course, their perception of this use from a more tactical, strategic point of view. It's an ideal entry point within problem solving for boccia play. So basically, I will give my students a set of boccia balls, and they'll be from super soft to hard. And then I'll be like, where would you see these being used within a match? And then I relay this even closer to them, to how they play, if they're a ramp user, or if they're a thrower or a kicker. And I've seen huge positive learning effects from this approach. I also make an important point of the dynamic play. So increased awareness when to reposition themselves in order to get closest to their targets. simply just because, as we know it, when we introduce players to the sport, they are often very stationary. So I like to, especially with my children, just eliminate that and just sort of talk to them about, the various positions that they can place, that they can position themselves into in order to really get close and win the game. Leading on from introducing the children to different ball harnesses, and of course also ramps through more experienced players, parents will usually also purchase first boccia equipment for their children. So in order to make this a success, not that parents spend their amount of money, I usually do diagnostics first with the children just to see really what benefits them. And then, of course, the children will feedback what works for them. And then parents who are willing and interested can then, of course, purchase these sports tools for their children. I also then, at this stage, also place more importance on strength and conditioning training. It can be introduced as well to the child's physical as well as occupational therapist, so that their therapy outside of school and outside of warm-up and strength training within the club can also be adapted to their play in boccia whilst they're at their physical or occupational therapist. School-based competitions will also at this stage be a first introduction to competitive play, where they would use this experience to establish their individual player development profile. This is simply a profile that I establish with the children, how they play, how they want to progress, and generally speaking, what are their aims of partaking? Because at this stage, usually you will also perhaps have the first children who are signaling they want to go down the competitive route, whilst some children may be like, I just want to stay here until I'm happy with how I play, and then we may continue to see where this takes us. Formal competitions, especially towards the end of the age of 12, and I mean formal by regionals as well as nationals, will start to emerge as a focal point for some of these children. With this, I like to make an introduction to national classification and its complexity. And of course, also this needs to not only be communicated with the children and the players, but also with their parents, as of course, this is a very interesting time in their development cycle. Within developing a child athlete and of course documenting this, I sat down one evening and I thought to myself, how can I make development of a development tool that really sort of sticks with them and is of true value? So I came up with the Bocciapass. For those of us who are in the German-speaking world, they will notice we have the swimming pass, which most of us in Germany did while in school. And this is a sort of lean on to that, just about boccia, of course. It's an A6 booklet which has a range of tasks, exercises, and games to develop their skills. Upon passing a task exercise, the children will get boccia sticker stuck onto that page with the task and exercise into the book. The aim, of course, is to fill up the entire booklet with stickers. I like to also comment on the fact of player diversity. The booklet comes in various covers. It comes in a ramp user, as well as a thrower, as well as a kicker and power chair users. And in a moment, I'll show you the other covers. Upon, of course, completing the booklet, the kids get a very special badge and, of course, a very special soft golden boccia ball, which I've recently developed with a toy manufacturer here. This is an achievement, something that they can put on their future trophy case to show, look, I passed my Bocciapass and it helped me develop into this athlete. And just the sentiment of this, of course, is to promote long-term sport development and to be that very first task with milestones that they can partake in until they start, of course, competing, if they should choose, seriously as well as internationally. As you can see, we also here have the kicker, the ramp user in the power chair, and the power chair thrower. And as I said, and as I like to say, I just find it important that all children see themselves reflected on the material that I use. And therefore, I developed with my graphic designer a very diverse range of Boccia pictograms so that the children do really see themselves in there. Because, of course, we have children who are ramp users and the power chair and are very young, and they will, of course, look at the cover and be like, well, great, but I don't actually throw. So that was my intention here. Now I'm going to talk about the interesting topic of classification. I find under the age of 12 is a tricky time to classify certain players, as of course they're still growing older and developing physically. I have 6-year-old players who, that is just far too early in my learned opinion to classify them. Children, of course, will also have surgeries which will alter their physical profile. So therefore, I generally avoid doing it and wait until they're older, typically between 13 to 15 years of age. However, for school-based competition, I've conceptualized a regional bubble class system. The play classes within the bubble class system pop just like a bubble when the child grows, which allows them more flexibility when progressing to the youth stage of play and toward their first official national classification. Now I'm going to come on to the next topic, of course, which is the very first tournament/competition. Children love competing in sports, and it's extremely important for their development. As we all know, they learn so much from partaking in competition, from fair play, teamwork, through to just putting their skills under measure. So in order, of course, to make the competitions at this stage fair, I, as previously discussed, would group them into bubble classes based on their profile. The T1 profile is based on throwers, which is why the T is there, who have a similar profile to BC1 athletes. This may be, due to very early signs of not being able to release the ball due to spasticity despite aiming, and of course also feathering it with their arms, through to athletes who, as I said, just simply have the similar profile towards BC1. T2 is, of course, for throwers who mirror the BC2 or BC4 class. So these generally are the throwers who are relatively, who are still, of course, will have an impairment which affects all 4 of their limbs. However, they have generally more mobility than those within the T1 class. So again, yes. And of course, we have the ramp, which is for future BC3 players, I personally, within my educational facilities, have, of course, young players who are already at the age of 6 and who benefit from using a ramp more. And of course, more interestingly, the last one, which is the SC class, which stands for small children, those are typically around the age of 5 to 8 years of age. And these children are simply just not strong enough yet to throw the ball very far on court. So instead of having them face off against somebody who is a T1, who is 11, and who can propel the ball considerably wider on the court, I think the small children class is just a fair way of these children to have an encouraging, fair, and really gripping competitive experience. The competition format is dependent, of course, upon the amount of participants, as well as, of course, the time schedule that we have. Here in Germany, in Berlin, I have a school day to execute a competition. So therefore, I use knockout tournament structure. And of course, also at school events, I like to think of, and of course also is, everybody is a winner, as basically at this stage, good sportspersonship and observing the rules are paramount. All participants get a medal and a little certificate of participation. So we're almost at the end. I would just like to say that working with children is an extremely magical experience, and when done right, you will learn so much more about yourself too, while of course changing the children, their lives, in a profound way. Children will offer creative and ingenious solutions when playing, they often broaden my perspective of what's possible. And I am often finding myself scrambling down their ideas, their outputs, the way they do things, simply because I never would have thought of this. And children offer honest feedback, which, as a coach and for my development, which is continual as a coach, I find this really invaluable. And I'm so grateful for children for just showing me so many different ways of playing and giving me such interesting feedback. And lastly, I think this is my most important message from the final remarks section, which is treat working with children as a collaboration rather than lecturing them on what we know. A collaboration, they're humans, we're all humans, and they just have interesting ways of doing things. And I just really find that very, very invaluable, just having their experience as well as considerations and questions as well as ideas which help me develop. So I just really think work with them on a one-on-one level, on a even-footed ground, and that really will just create such a wonderful working relationship, and they will be thankful for that. We, of course, are also thankful, and they will reward us with this mutual respect by accompanying us and allowing us as coaches to develop them into confident and engaged boccia players. And yes, with that, I come to the end. I say thank you for both your attendance and attention. I hope you've taken some useful pointers from this webinar and have gained insight into developing boccia locally for children within your region. If you have any further questions, you can type them out now or just email me on hornig@boccia/bb.de. And of course, I also have Instagram and Twitter where you may follow me, reach out to me. I'll be happy to communicate within any of those channels.